Thank you for joining us for Downtown Island UX. As I mentioned before, this is like, I think we're over a year now since our last in-person meeting, but still trying to keep on with the good topics that everybody want to come out and see. And a lot of times with Downtown Island UX, we're talking about topics on how to do UX. But tonight we're going to be talking about UX job search. So before we get into it, and I pressed the wrong key to move forward, we just want to say, first of all, thank you for joining us. We know a lot of you have a lot going on in your lives right now and with the people around you. And we were talking about Zoom fatigue before that. It's real. And so thank you for joining us on the Zoom. And from all of us on the organizing team, we hope that you and your family are safe during this time, and just wish you all the best. And thanks for your passion in being here tonight. And as a bit of housekeeping, we like to share these meetings, these kind of guidelines for virtual meetings for us, wherever you can. We know that cameras on, especially if you've been cameras on all day for meetings, it might be easier to just keep your camera off. That's totally fine, but this is a community, so we'd love to see you. Plus, at the end, we always snap a goofy picture, and I made sure to wear a different shirt than I had on in this picture here. So I didn't have the same shirt at every meetup, but you know, hey, it's the pandemic. So as far as questions go for the meetup, there's a couple of ways to do it. If you open the participants panel in Zoom, if you click at the bottom link in Zoom that says participants, and you open that panel, there's a more link and you can raise your hand in there. That's one good way to ask a question. You can also just ask questions in the comments. The other organizers will try to keep track of those, and even if we don't get a spot to ask a question, they'll try to call on it or ask the question for you. We'll try to make sure we get to everything before the end of the meeting. We'll also have some Q&A time at the end as well. Also, I want to thank all of the other co-organizers. It's definitely a group effort getting this meetup together every month. We all kind of take turns putting together topics, and we get together and talk about ideas. We're always looking for more ideas. So it's the organizing crew is Abhishek, Leah, Wes, Matt, and myself. Most of us have that UX background in our Zoom background. If you have ideas for a topic you want to present about, if you have feedback for us and how we could do the meetup better, if you have ideas for virtual team building activities and you just want to share them with somebody, please reach out, connect with us. We love talking to people about UX and about this meetup. And then finally, our mission, and it's been our mission since the very beginning when Matt started the meetup, is to create opportunities for anyone to learn and share knowledge about the field of user experience. Just trying to build passion for this industry and help connect people with the field, connect people with the tools and resources to do their jobs, and connect people with information about how to get their jobs. So that's what we'll be talking about tonight. And since the very beginning, one partner that we've had in this meetup is Tech Systems. When we were in person, that meant that they brought usually pizza and beer to the meetup to have, and as part of our kind of pre-meetup conversation time. We don't have the pizza and beer. We haven't figured out how to do that remote yet. But in the meantime, they've been a great partner for us, and they're a great resource if you're looking for your next opportunity or if you're looking to hire for your organization. So getting started, I haven't introduced myself yet. I'm Jason Beaird. I'm a UX team lead at a company called Paylocity. I work remote from here in Orlando. Paylocity is remote all over the United States, has headquarters in Schaumburg, Illinois, near Chicago. And I've been there for about 3 years. I've been a team lead at Paylocity for about 2, and I'll pass it over to Steph and Mineseon to introduce themselves as well.
Hi, I'm Mineseon. I'm a senior UX designer and researcher. Well, technically, I just became senior level designer because I was up until January, I was mid-level designer. I decided to go do this session with you guys because as I was searching for a new position, I realized that this experience that I'm going through can really help a lot of people, especially with COVID and in a lot of laid off situations. So I'm here today.
Thanks, Mineseon. Steph?
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Steph. I'm a senior UX designer at Qualtrics. I'm currently based out of Seattle, Washington, though I did live in Orlando for 3 years. And fun fact, Wes was actually my manager when I worked in Orlando. He was the one who actually gave me my very first real UX job in software, and he introduced me to what was then called Dux, but is now Do UX. That's going to take a little getting used to for me. Like Minsun, I recently went through the hiring process. I just got hired at Qualtrics back in November and started in December. So just wanted to kind of share my experience with all of you.
We're excited to get into that. And so moving on, we've kind of written down kind of a prepared a deck of slides. This is a presentation, but it's also kind of meant to be an interactive conversation. Minsun and Steph recently took on new roles. I'm kind of coming to the conversation from a hiring manager perspective. I've been the hiring manager for every product design position at Paylocity for the last 2 years that I've been a manager there. So we'll talk about things to think about before you start applying. We'll talk about the application process, about your resume and your portfolio, preparing for the interview, and then moving on from there to the offer stage, and then we'll make sure we leave some time at the end for Q&A as well. All right, jumping right into it. Minsun, do you want to start with this one?
Sure. So, I mean, people can start in any different ways that they want, but this is how I and Jason and Stephanie would do before even start applying for positions. So if you can go to next slide. I would set up a goal, whether I'm going for a UI designer role or UX designer role or researcher role. And it is especially really important to setting up the goal, because a lot of times job title and job descriptions don't really match. If you understand what I'm talking about, I'll give you an example. So a job title can say a UX designer role that they're looking for, and the job description would say we are looking for somebody who can put together quick mock-up, interactive user interface elements, and that's pretty much heavily oriented toward design library. Then you may not have an opportunity to go talk to users or do any kind of generative research. So there's things that you need to really look into when you go look for your position. And that's what I mean by setting up the goals ahead of time. And then also, in my opinion, setting a few industries as a target is also important, because I'll give you an example of certain industries like fintech industry or healthcare industry or Internet of Things industry, like very heavily technical oriented industries. They oftentimes require knowledge to even get into the industry. And once you are in those industries, it's really interesting that the jobs that you are hearing from recruiters, they reach out to you, are pretty much really focused on to that specific industry. So you have to think about which industry you're going in or looking for. Otherwise, it kind of can get really complicated in the end. So that's my point here, and I'll give it to Stephanie.
Yeah, so as Minsun said, whether you're looking for your first job, which I know there might be a lot of you here who are looking for your first UX role, or whether you're just looking to move on from your current position for one reason or another, the most important thing you can do before you start applying is to have a really strong understanding of what you want out of your next role. So not just knowing what kind of role you want, whether, like Minsun said, UI, UX, research, etc., but what do you want out of the job itself? Do you want to be challenged more than your current role? Is there a specific industry you want to work in, like Minsun said, or are you looking to relocate? Do you want to live in a different city? Or do you want a better work-life balance? Maybe the current job that you're in is too demanding. You feel like you don't have enough time for your personal life, or maybe you just want to make more money, and that's totally valid. But knowing exactly what you want out of your next role can really help you focus your job search, so you don't find yourself just applying to 100 jobs that are all completely different and maybe don't match your ultimate long-term goals and don't match your experience. And that kind of brings me to my next point, that after you've figured out what you want out of your next role, it's important to kind of reflect on how your next move is going to fit into your long-term goals and into your career aspirations. So let's say you're at a point where you feel like you're ready to be challenged, you're ready to move up the ladder. You want to make sure that you're looking for a job that reflects that, right? Or at least you're looking for companies that are going to make that possible, that are going to allow you that room for growth, whether you want to grow into a senior level position or a people manager role. Knowing how that fits into your ultimate goals is going to really help you find the right fit. And then understanding that if you are changing industries or if you're changing disciplines, so if you're moving from design into research, something along those lines, you may have to take either a lateral move or you may have to take something lower, and just kind of reflect with yourself and see if that, you know, fits okay with you and fits okay with your career aspirations.
And then you're expecting some comments from me and said you get a weird illustration. And what I wanted to bring up here is that the hiring process looks different from a lot of different angles. So from you as an applicant, you kind of see, you know, one sliver of what's happening in the background of what the needs are of the organization that's hiring, what the objectives are of the talent team or the recruiting members that are reaching out, trying to screen people, what the hiring manager's perspective is, what they're looking for in candidates to add to their team. So it reminds me a bit of, you know, the parable of the blind man and the elephant, where each person is seeing, you know, a small part of the whole. And you know, really kind of understanding the hiring experience and what the whole process is like end to end. It's like any other UX problem. The more you can see the bigger picture, the better you can understand how to grow yourself and how to succeed and deliver in finding your own next opportunity. So to kind of piggyback on top of what Steph and Mineseon were both saying, narrowing down before you get started, before you start applying to things, narrowing down what kinds of roles and what industries you're interested in, you know, it's very important. And applying to roles in one domain when you're in another domain can be difficult. So, you know, understanding what you like about being in the enterprise space or B2B SaaS or e-commerce, whether you want to focus on desktop web applications or on mobile. In most cases, you're working on both. Sometimes you focus on one or the other. Whether, you know, what you like about designing and problem solving for design is it about automating complex tasks? Are you a generalist or a specialist? I know Mineseon was just saying about, you know, looking for a UI designer, but then, you know, job description is way more vague and goes more into kind of the front end development side of things. And then through the meetup and through meeting people online that are trying to break into the industry, a lot of times the conversation is, how do I get into a UX role from a marketing background or from an engineering background or from a QA background? What's my best chance of getting into design? And the thing I always try to remind people, especially when you're kind of trying to break into the UX industry, is how can you leverage your past experience? So look back at what job experience you have already. Let's say it's a marketing background, you want to get into UX. Sometimes looking for UX design roles within the marketing side of a product org is a good way to kind of get in the field, get the experience you want in order to move on to the longer term goal that you have. So anytime you can kind of leverage your experience in a way that employers will see that as a benefit, as an added experience to you as the whole stuff that you bring to your job is a benefit.
I want to add one more thing about what Jason just said about leveraging your experience as a breaking into the industry. 5 years ago, I think it's maybe 6, I was working at a manufacturing company, light bulb manufacturing company. They didn't even have any solution for any web service or anything like that. But I really wanted to go back into UX design industry. By the way, I'm immigrant. So I used to work as a designer, but then came here, I had to rebuild everything. I didn't have my degree in the States or nothing. So I had to restart it, by the way. So to rebuild my resume and prove that I am capable of doing that, what I had to do is every opportunity that I have at that company, let's say we're gonna go out and make a light bulb, then they're like, oh, we don't need to do any user research, but I'll be insisting to go talk to users and then build my own portfolio in a user experience displaying way. So when I'm ready to move to the next job or break into the industry, that I'll have something that I can show, even though I didn't work for any company that actually does any UX related solutions, if that makes sense. And Stephanie also has something that she can share. It's really valuable because she also came from, if I'm right, graphic design background, Stephanie.
Yeah, so I actually started my career, as Min-san said, more in the visual design space. Actually, my very first job out of college was in marketing. It was in digital marketing. I worked in the fashion industry on the digital marketing team, and I worked on our brand website. So I got great experience working with in-house graphic designers and working with the IT team, and getting familiar with a CMS and getting familiar with web design foundations. Even though I did have a graphic design degree, it gave me really great practical experience. And I realized that even though at the time I wasn't doing design, I really missed that aspect. And I made that a goal of mine, was to get back into design. And I actually started in the agency world. So I worked for a big digital agency in New York. And that's where I first discovered that UX even existed as a discipline. I'd always thought that visual design was kind of the only path when it came to web. And it was almost like a light bulb went off in my head. It was that perfect combination of creativity, but also problem solving. And so I really started gearing all of my my experience towards that, and moved to a much smaller agency and asked if I could take on more UX focused work, doing wireframes, doing really scrappy user research, building out user flows. And that experience was enough for Wes to give me a chance. I'd never had UX in my title, but I was able to leverage the experience I'd had in the years prior to show that I had the capacity to be successful and to be a UX designer.
That's wonderful. UX is an industry with a lot of people that come into it from other areas. So one of the things I mention sometimes is like embrace your inner misfit, like what I was saying about, leverage your past experience. We all kind of come to the table with a different set of experience, a different expertise, a different perspective, and those perspectives all help us to understand users better. So to kind of sum up what we talked about before, know yourself, your position in the job market, and what you want for your next, not just for your next role, but for the role that you have as your 5-year goal or your 10-year goal, or where you'd hope to go with your career next.
All right.
All right, next topic. Let's jump into resumes, Min-san.
Yep, writing resume, super important, right? Because if you don't pass that first round, you don't even get to talk to HR. If you don't talk to HR, there's no way that you can go talk to hiring manager and design department. So writing resume is really important. This is more of resume 101, not just applied to design field, but to every field, that you should write your resume around your achievement. Instead of just saying, oh, I designed this and that, you can say, by redesigning the service, company gained this much more customers during this period, like being very specific and provide the numbers and achievement that you did or changes you've made, if possible. And then I think leveraging keyword is very important. And then a lot of companies use like automated filtering system. If you don't really show that keyword, and sometimes it doesn't even go through the computer filter. This is really frustrating. So read job description closely and trying to catch those keywords that you must have in your resume. A lot of times it is pretty common words like design systems or user research. Once you go through a couple job descriptions, you get the sense of repeating words here and there. And those are highly likely keywords that you need to have in your resume. And the other one is keep it short. I've seen hiring manager complaining about a resume that's 20 pages long. I mean, I get it. You have a lot of experience, but nobody wants to read that, you know, right?
One
Yeah,
question about the writing measurable achievements that he asked, like, how do you get the stats to put on your resume? I know we talked about that during the planning session.
Yep. I'm done. You can go to Stephanie.
Oh, did you want to answer that question?
Oh, what was that question? I'm sorry.
Like, how do you, one question came from the audience is, how do you get those stats to those measurable achievements?
Oh,
that
yes,
you put on
I
your
was
resume?
going to mention that. Thank you so much. I was going to mention that. So it's really, really awkward. So I would say you have to maintain a really good relationship with either a person who does marketing or do the data, or developer who has access to the backend backlog data. Otherwise, by the time that you are trying to look for the position, you have to awkwardly approach them and say, hey, we're not really friends and I have never talked to you, but can you give me those numbers? Then you get a suspicious look, you know? So make friends upfront with them. And so you can hear what's going on. And then they kind of like to share things like, yeah, this company made this much progress this year, and then your department or your team or your design made this much impact. They just say things out loud. That's one way to do.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of what Minseon was saying, ideally your company and your product team, if you're already in a UX role, obviously it's a little bit more difficult if you don't already have a UX role. And at that point, I think it's okay not to have those measurable stats. If you don't have it, don't make it up. But if your company does have analytics and they're tracking adoption of new features, just every time that you work on a project, from what I've seen, most product teams will track adoption across, week, 30 days, 60, 90 days, et cetera, after launch. Just kind of keep track of those for projects that you've worked on. Maybe write them down, keep them somewhere safe so that if you ever need to reference them, you already have them. And that goes for really anything that you work on, which we'll talk a little bit later when it comes to your portfolio. But when it comes to your resume, this may sound really obvious, but if you're applying to be a UX designer, the design of your resume matters. And it matters just as much as the content. Think of the recruiters as your user, right? They are reading hundreds, if not thousands, depending on the size of the company, of resumes every day for probably a couple of different positions, depending on how large the company is. And they are not reading every single one of those resumes word for word, right? So what you need to do is you need to use the design of your resume, one, to stand out, to be able to communicate the most important information about yourself and your experience at a glance. Like they should be able to see in 5 to 10 seconds of looking at your resume what your relevant experience is for the role, and maybe a little bit about you and your design aesthetic. And it's also just a great opportunity to show off your design chops, right? Show that you can use typography, you can use layout and visual design to clearly communicate with your user. And it's a great opportunity to show those recruiters that you're thinking about the user, no matter who they are, whether it's a product or whether it's a resume, you're thinking about them and their needs throughout the entire journey, which is obviously a key to success when it comes to user experience.
And there's a bunch of awesome questions coming in the chat. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to keep up with them. We'll try to answer some as we kind of go through, but try to keep rolling and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end for sure. To kind of follow on what Steph and Minseon have already said, think of the recruiter and their role in kind of filtering through hundreds of resumes a day and figure out who to forward on to a hiring manager screen. Even for the person that's in the hiring manager screen seat, just having 5 or 10 people to review in a day for a role that's open, trying to look at a resume and a portfolio while being in a current design role or manager role for UX, and trying to make a gut level decision on who to move forward to the next stage of interview process, to a hiring manager screen or whatnot. The more clear and more concise you can be in your resume, the better. And one tip that I have is make sure that the resume details that you have in your portfolio match, I mean, the details you have in your resume match what is on LinkedIn as well. I've seen cases where people are applying to a product design role, and in the resume, list all their experiences as being UX designer or product designer. But then in LinkedIn, because maybe they, they're more of a kind of a front end role or more focused on research, the title completely doesn't match what it is in the resume, and it's like I don't know which one to trust. So you absolutely should tailor your resume for each job that you're applying to, and try to highlight the parts that you think align with the description in the job, but don't change important details like the like the title. And one tip that I give people is that because you want to try to tailor your resume, and if you have a cover letter, we talked, Steph and Minseon and I talked about the value of whether or not you need a cover letter when applying to roles. I recommend if you have a resume and a cover letter, duplicating that each time you're applying to a new role, and keeping a copy of the resume, the cover letter if applicable, and also a copy of the job description that you are applying to. Because a lot of times when you're applying to roles, as it gets filled, the job will be taken down, and you might want to have that job description to look back at roles that you've applied to in the past, and you won't have an ability to do that. Or even if you moved on to the next stage of the process and they took the role down, you want to be able to look back on that and review it before kicking off the next stage in the interview process. Steph, do you want to sum it up this time?
Sure, yeah. So your resume and your cover letter, which I'll say a little piece about the cover letter after this, but those are really your first impressions for the reviewers and for the recruiters. So you want to keep it brief, focus on the outcomes, use action words. That's a really big thing. If you are doing any UX writing, you always want your content to be based on the action, not based on the subject, and make sure it aligns with your LinkedIn identity. Don't go changing your responsibilities or your role just because you think it'll look good. Be true to what your experience is, while also, making sure that you're using keywords from the role that you're applying to. But on cover letters, like Jason alluded to, we did kind of go back and forth on whether to cover letters here, no pun intended. Also, I apologize for my dog. I personally have found that they're not necessary. I don't think I've written one in probably 6 or 7 years. It's been a long time. I think they can be a good way to stand out, but I don't think they're necessary. I think if you've got a really strong resume and portfolio, that those will kind of get you the attention from the recruiters. I don't know if Jason or Minseon, if you've got other thoughts on that you want to touch on.
Well, my experience, at least the 2020, there are companies that has upload your cover letter section. I ignored them all, and you know that I got multiple offers. So I guess sometimes it works.
Yeah, and Eric made a good point. Like when we're talking about designing your resume, you're usually needing to upload your resume into the ATS system that you're applying to a job through. A lot of times it'll try to digitize that. So you do want to at the very least review what it's outputting if it's a system where you get to view the summary of what it's digested from your PDF. But keeping track of what you can kind of see and what it looks like when it goes into an ATS, an applicant tracking system, is important, because it can come through really garbled from the automated side.
I also love Wes's point about rather than a cover letter, making sure that you have like a little blurb about yourself. That is something I do have on the top of my resume, is having like a quick little summary about who you are, why you do what you do, and what your kind of overall goals are. I guess it's hard to summarize that, but that can be just as effective as a cover letter and serve the same purpose.
And every single one of these topics could be an entire UX topic. So I feel like we're flying through the topic of resume. Like I said, lots of great questions in the chat. Keep them coming. But we're going to jump now into the portfolio side of things. So,
oh yes, portfolio is exciting, right? So I would say be a storyteller and structure your portfolio the way that you can support your story. Everybody wants to hear what kind of problem that you faced, and then how you approached using design thinking method, and what kind of result you came out of it after you solved the problem. To have that, you have to think and structure your portfolio and introduce it the way that that process goes, flow that way. And one of the methods you can use is a STAR method. There's lots of other ways that you can do this. This is just an example. It's a situation, task, action, result. You can have those sections and write a brief couple phrases related to those, and introduce your thought process to the people. And also focusing on your target role when you are presenting your portfolio is really important. Let's say this job description was about a user interface designer who can create very interactive mock-up using Extra or Adobe XD. It's like animation related. Then the entire team will be excited to see more of those work that you did rather than a lot of research or a lot of coding, so to say. So be prepared and then ready for that kind of conversation to happen. And what I did in person for my job search is that I benchmarked my role models' portfolios. Let's say I aimed for being a Facebook designer, then I'll go look up on LinkedIn and then find out those Facebook designers and then see if I can see their portfolios, because sometimes they share their portfolios on my LinkedIn profile and stuff. And I'll go and then see how they laid out their portfolio, how they structured it, how they worded it, and trying to see if I can mold my portfolio like theirs. I mean, content is completely different, but then I can do a similar structure, or I can show a similar thought process if I can, or even forging the image or display of outcome in the way that they did. If that's my target that I'm going for. It does help, by the way. And then, of course, get it reviewed. Wes helped me create when I was looking for a job 2 years ago. He gave me lots of feedback, and those feedback is really valuable. Go find senior designers, managerial level designers, and get your portfolio reviewed before you apply for jobs. And the thing is, not every, so it's like a lot of designers have different perspectives. It's ultimately comes down to you who makes the decision, but it's always valuable feedback that you can hear from people. And then the last thing I think the most important is if it is very sensitive information that you designed for your company, either whitewash it completely or password protect it. I don't want you to be in trouble. And last year when my company trying to hire a designer, we found a really talented designer that everybody loved, but then we searched that person's name and project on Google, and guess what we found? An entire project that was for the company that he was working for was out in public with all this sensitive data. And then immediately as we saw that, my team manager decided not to even go interview that person. We don't want to be in trouble, right? So that's so far what I have. Oh, Stephanie, you're muted.
Sorry, my dog was barking, so I muted myself. So contrary to popular belief, you only need a few quality case studies in your portfolio. I know that sounds unbelievable, but you really only need 2 to 3 projects. But choose the ones that best showcase all of your relevant skills, whether that's information architecture, whether it's UX or UI, research, interaction design, whatever skill sets you have, make sure that your projects do highlight those and they highlight your design process. But don't feel like every single project in your portfolio actually has to follow the ideal UX process. It doesn't have to follow the ideal design thinking process, because in reality, and I think everyone who is a practicing UX designer here will tell you this, it is so rare, if it ever happens, that you actually get to follow the ideal process in your practice. You have to be able to adapt to different situations, whether you've got last minute requirements, whether you have to be able to support a really important business need. That's a big part of being a UX designer, is being able to balance the user experience with business needs. And sometimes you just have to adapt and you have to move quickly. At Qualtrics, we like to call it being scrappy. And if you can show that in your portfolio, that's a really important quality to have as UX designer, and it's going to make you stand out because it's going to show the hiring manager that you can adapt to any situation while still producing a great user experience. I would also say, make sure that you show your work. No matter what the outcome of the project was, whether it ultimately got implemented or not, I'll be honest with you, I've got 3 projects in my portfolio right now. 2 of the 3 never got implemented, but I did a lot of work on them. They both show the range of my skills, and I showed my thinking, and that's okay, because ultimately at the end of the day, you don't control every aspect of the process. So if you can show your work and show your process and show your thinking, that is most often what they're looking for, is your thinking, not the final product. You do want to have something that has a final product, but showing your thinking is one of the most important things. And then the last piece of advice I would have, this is something that was actually a piece of advice that was given to me when I was starting my job search at the end of last year by a good friend who works for Microsoft, is that you want to make it scannable. It's kind of like the resume where the recruiter is not going to read it. They're not going to read through your entire case study that is 1,000 words. They're going to look through it just to kind of see that, it looks like it passes the eye test. A hiring manager is going to look and scan through it, but they're not going to read every single word that you painstakingly worked on. That's going to be more for when you ultimately present your portfolio in your interviews. And so what I actually did and was really useful was I had a little summary of each of my case studies at the top. So whoever was coming and viewing my case study, they could get a kind of a high level overview of what the problem I was solving was, what the experience was while we were designing it, and then what the ultimate outcome was. And if they were interested, then they could kind of go through and see the whole process. So you only need a few quality case studies that really show your process, show your work, show that you're adaptable, and make it scannable.
Absolutely, and everything you guys said about the process is the most important thing. I think that's what hiring managers often are looking for is your design process. They're looking for things like your ability to tell a story. They're looking for parts in the portfolio where you're showing what you presented in a stakeholder conversation. We're not looking for a finished product. In most cases for UX roles, we're not looking for the dribble designer. We're looking for the process and how you got to the conclusion you did. And like Steph said, it's okay if some projects in your portfolio didn't get implemented. I think if you can explain that in a conversation, like how it was that it got to development and then didn't work out, hiring managers want to hear all that and hear how you handle those kind of situations. And on top of all that, I think one thing, we've seen a few comments in the chat about, why would I put all this effort in for, a company that might just ghost me, or you might not even make it through the recruiter screen. It's important to recognize that even having a design portfolio when you're a busy designer, if you're currently in a role, it's tough to do, it's tough to build. So one tweet from Jared Spool from 2016 that gets mentioned all the time in talking about hiring is that, if you're trying to hire designers and require a portfolio, you're not going to get top talent because the best designers don't have them. They're too busy solving problems to go and build a portfolio. But as a hiring manager, I will say it is very helpful if a candidate has a portfolio so that I can see if you're solving problems in a similar way to the way we solve them in our org, so that if you're dropped into a problem space or into a product team, that you'll be able to hit the ground running and that you've solved similar problems, because you can't really cover those kind of things in a resume. so to sum it all up, it's about quality, not quantity. And you know, as Steph said, it's you want to try to show, don't tell. It's something we often say in UX. You do need words. You know, you got to describe your process in a case study for your portfolio. But 3 to 6 case studies should be plenty in order to show your process. And hiring managers want to see that process much more than finished product. Again, portfolio section of portfolios for UX roles is another topic that we could dig into for an entire hour. But we're going to move into talking about the interview process next.
I know we have so many things to touch today.
Yeah, so I can go over this screen. So obviously every interview process for every company is going to be different. So what you see here is kind of a generalization based on what the 3 of us have seen in our experience. You may have 3 rounds of interviews, you may have 5 rounds of interviews, you may only have 2 or anything in between. You know, some of these things that you see in the 2nd round could actually be in the 3rd round. Things you see in the 3rd round may not actually be things you have to go through. These are just experiences that we've had, but I will say that every single job starts with an HR screen, unless you know someone in the company and you are a referral. Sometimes you can get past the HR screen and you can go directly to the hiring manager interview. But typically most jobs will start with an HR screen where you are just talking to the recruiter. They're going to want to know about your interest in the company. Why them? Why did you choose to apply for them? Why are you interested in working for them? So it's really important that when you do apply for these jobs and you do end up getting an interview, that you do as much research on the company and the work that they do as possible. A good recruiter is hopefully going to ask you about your salary expectations in this round, and the best recruiters will actually tell you what the salary for that role is in the HR screen, so you don't have to spend the entire interview process wondering whether this role is going to be worth interviewing for and whether it's going to be a higher pay scale than your current role, and if it's going to align with your expectations. They're going to want to know why you're looking for jobs, why you're applying, especially if you currently have a job. Obviously, it's a little bit different if it's your first role and you're just out of college or you're transitioning industries. Just have a good reason that you can give for why you are looking to change positions. They're going to want to know your job search status. So how many other companies are you currently interviewing with? And you can choose to be as transparent or as opaque as you would like in this. You have no obligation to indicate that you are talking to other companies. When you get further in the process, this can possibly be used as leverage, but it's really just up to you and what you're comfortable with at that stage. And then they want to know just your high-level work experience. They may ask your high-level design process, but in reality, this is a recruiter. They are not super familiar with what it takes to be a UX designer. And then they're going to want to know if you're going to need visa sponsorship or whether you're a US citizen. And then if all goes well, you'll get moved on to the 2nd round, which is typically a hiring manager interview. Sometimes it may be just another team member, but this is where you're going to go into a little bit more detail about your work experience and your technical skills. You're going to probably be asked to walk through at least 1, if not 2 of the case studies in your portfolio. You're going to be asked how you collaborate with a team and how you collaborate cross-functionally, and your ability to deal with different challenges and conflict. And then typically the final round is going to be with a number of different team members. At Qualtrics, we call this the loop interview because you kind of go in a loop and meet with a number of different cross-functional team members. And in my experience, in this last time that I was looking for a job, I had to give a portfolio presentation every time that I interviewed. And then a lot of times you'll have to do a design exercise. Hopefully it's not, one that you have to take home and do outside of the interview, but it just depends. This is where they're going to see if you're a culture fit. And it's also where they're going to want to know a little bit more about how you work cross-functionally, because you're probably going to interview with a product manager, with someone from engineering, someone from research, and they'll really give you a chance to understand how everybody on the team works together.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Stephanie. So for me, let me just get more deeper into some of the details. So as Stephanie said, each stage you might have to present your portfolios again. At the same time, you probably are asked to introduce yourself, because there's new people all the time joining the new session of the interview. And so for that matter, I would say get a shorter version of introduction and longer version ready, so you can see whether this is appropriate to use longer version and shorter version, and interchangeably use it. And of course, it's the same for your portfolio too. Sometimes unexpected question raised then, and you might have to do your portfolio walkthrough, the whole thing in a very short period of time that was not told in the beginning of the interview that you're supposed to do, but you had to deal with it. So that's something that you need to be prepared. And again, I said being a storyteller is very important when talking about making portfolio, because this is the time to shine. You share the stories and make them just like a story. So let them listen and then be curious about the solutions that you came with. And this is the last part. It's really important. They will always ask you that like one story or two that how you messed things up. They just want to hear from you how things go wrong. So be ready for those stories, and just freely share. Don't be afraid. Everybody make mistakes. It's not something that you need to hide.
Yeah, having a mistake is definitely a requirement. I think I've asked, tell me about a time that you've made a mistake and had to figure out how to resolve it. I think it comes up in every interview. So go ahead, Steph.
No, I was going to kind of piggyback off. I know one thing that I do when I'm preparing for interviews, I tend to write out answers to questions that I expect that they're going to ask. When you start interviewing enough, there are kind of the general questions that pretty much every interviewer is going to ask you at different stages, and having something pre-prepared, and especially if you're doing it virtually, now that everything is on Zoom, you can have it in front of you, especially if you find yourself having difficulty thinking on your feet, can be really helpful. That's been a big help for me when I've been interviewing, including having a failure and being able to quickly think on my feet instead of having to think quickly on my feet about failure that I've had.
And
yeah, so I just want
sorry.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the portfolio presentation, because I know this was something that I'd never experienced before my most recent job search. Now, granted, I am on the West Coast for the first time. So I was previously in New York, Chicago, and Orlando. And so every company and every industry is going to be very different. But every job that I interviewed for this last round, I had to do a portfolio presentation. And this is something that happens typically at the beginning of your final interview. Like I said, at Qualtrics, we call it the loop interview. And it's where you're going to present to a group of cross-functional team members that are ultimately going to be interviewing you one-on-one later in the day. And you're going to be asked to pick one or two of your best projects and put your very best one first, because chances are you might not get to the second one. And you are going to be asked to present your portfolio in a way that tells a story. So it's a different purpose than your portfolio case study, which really gets into the nitty-gritty. This is the time to kind of pull out those most important pieces of information and tell a really compelling story about that project. And it's totally okay if the projects that you put in this presentation are the same ones that you walked through in the second interview, because chances are most of the time it's a completely different audience. And even if someone that has previously interviewed you is in that presentation, they're looking for something completely different. They're looking for your communication skills. They're looking for your storytelling skills. And this is typically going to be about 45 to 60 minutes. I think mine were anywhere between 45 and 55 minutes. And I got to tell you, pro tip, practice, 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 because you do not want to go over that allotted time. You will get docked. They, may affect your final, the final outcome of the interview. If you go over time, it kind of shows your ability to manage time, but just practice, practice, practice. Can't stress that enough. And then finally, you may have to complete a design exercise. This could be anything from a design thinking exercise where they'll give you a hypothetical situation. When you're in person, typically this is known as like a whiteboarding exercise, and they'll ask you to kind of go through the whole design thinking process and think about who the users are and what the business needs are and what constraints are for this problem that they're presenting you. And they want to see how you really think through the problem. It could be something as simple as, it could be a take-home exercise where they ask you to create a design for a hypothetical situation. Or sometimes it's more of just a conversation where you don't actually have to whiteboard or draw anything out. But a lot of times, especially once you get into those higher level roles, I don't think it's quite as common in junior level roles, but once you get to mid-level and senior, you will most likely have to do a design exercise of some sort.
I want to add one more thing about the practice. It's really important. But me personally, it feels very different when you go in the interview versus practicing in front of the mirror at home. So what I do to practice, that I put the interviews or the job application that I apply to, the ones that I don't really care that much, is like in front of the other ones that I really do care. So by the time I get to the really important interview, that I practiced a bunch with these other companies that I don't care so much. So that's one way that I do.
And to give an idea of kind of what this process can look like, and it varies a lot from company to company. I think most of what we've been talking about has been a process that looks something like this. So this is similar to what our process looks like at Paylocity. There's typically a 45-minute phone call with a talent team member. When you get to that stage, because I'm confident that you all will in your job search at some point, don't be afraid to ask what the hiring process looks like, what the interview process looks like, what to expect from each stage of the process. The talent person should be able to, and usually is interested in giving you as much insight into that as possible. From the talent team interview at Paylocity, we move into a hiring manager screen. We used to do those pre-pandemic over the phone. And even though we do those on Zoom now, I try to avoid, actually, contrary to what Steph was saying, I try to avoid getting into screens and try to keep it all conversational about how different scenarios were handled, how you maybe resolved that UX failure that we talked about before, how you work with the product partners and how you work with development to usher something through to completion and make sure that it's done and follows the design that you created and the experience that you've worked so hard on. Once you move on past the hiring manager screen, design challenges is a really touchy topic in the UX hiring world. We at Paylocity, we have a design challenge. I've pushed instead for us to use a case study from your portfolio, which I think a lot of organizations are moving toward. That's similar to what Steph was saying, where you're kind of walking through a case study from your portfolio. That could be a couple if you don't have enough to fill a 45-minute slot. So what that kind of looks like for the final stage interview for us is there's always a conversation with a product owner, because the designer product owner relationship is one of the most important in our organization. It has to be a partnership. So we always bring product partners into our hiring process. There's always a stage with two product designers going over either that case study or the design challenge, depending on which path you chose. There's always a 45-minute conversation with another team lead that isn't the hiring manager, And I'll make a point here that, you know, the hiring manager for a role may not be the person, the manager that you'll be working under. It's just somebody that's hiring for that role in the organization. I know at Paylocity, we hire for the role, not for the specific team or the specific domain that you're going into. And then finally, there's an interview with somebody from leadership from the UX group, either our UX group lead or our VP of UX or director. And there's always a conversation at the end of that interview where everybody kind of sums up what they learned about the candidate and how they feel about whether or not they would be able to do the job that they're being hired for. So that's just kind of a little insight into what a typical interview process looks like. And as I said, it may look very different from organization to organization, especially at smaller organizations or ones where there's not as big of a UX team or design team. If it's a smaller org, this process may look entirely different. But for larger organizations, it'll probably look something like that.
Yeah, and I can confirm that this is about what Qualtrics process looks like. We've got about the same number of steps, except you're going to be doing the design challenge as part of your final interview. So your final interview does end up being about 3.5, 4 hours. And so I want to say with those final interviews, they do end up getting very long. Sometimes they're broken up into multiple sessions where they'll give you like an hour break in between sessions. But even so, don't be afraid to tell your interviewers when you need a break. You're human. They are not going to think any less of you. In fact, they are probably going to be impressed that you have no problem telling them that you need a break. So just don't be afraid, especially in the days of COVID where we're on screens all day. Even if you just need to stand up for a couple minutes, they will have no problem with that. I promise.
Yeah, we're all used to that during our work days, and the same applies for interview process as well. So if you need to get water, you need to take a bio break, don't be afraid to ask. As Steph said, you will get points taken if you way overblow your time for going through a portfolio, but you won't for asking to go to the bathroom or to take a short break. And then finally, practice, practice, practice. It's important to be positive. So I think I saw one question in the chat about how to talk about your previous role. Being positive about like the challenges that you had in a previous organization, if you're applying to get away from a current role, is very important. And be prepared for those common questions that UX failure, for how you partner with product, and then as much as possible, that practice will help you to be a better storyteller for knowing how to approach those questions and being able to talk clearly and have fun with the people that you're talking to, because they're looking to bring people onto their team that have positive energy most of the time. So moving on to the most exciting part of the conversation.
Yes, the most interesting part. All right, let's talk about the salary. So we did some research. So now this is more of a, you guys have to pitch in and what to think. And then apparently the location does impact on how much the average or median salaries look like. This is 1 to 3 years of experienced junior UX designer that Glassdoor.com would say. And this is more of the 3 to 6, like mid-year experienced UX designer salary. I would say Orlando, when I was working in Orlando, it felt that I was being paid a little less than the average what those websites said. And the other slide will say the senior designer salary that's on those websites would say that how much they are getting paid. But mind you that senior designers can, we said like 6 to 10, but if you don't really go into the managerial role, 20 years experienced designer also can be a senior UX designer. So those one who get paid like upper high end can be like 15, 20 years experienced ones.
Yeah, so there was a question in the chat. These are all just for the US in general. These are not specific to Orlando. And also just keep in mind, these are going to vary based on the industry that you're in. If you're working in software and technology, it's probably going to be on the higher end. If you're working in hospitality or you're working in an agency, for example, there's a very different pay scale for working in an agency versus working in in-house for a software company. So just keep in mind, these things can really vary. We wanted to keep this pretty general so that it could apply as much to everybody's experience. This is also for designers. We probably should have had some on here for researchers as well. I'm not sure off the top of my head, maybe Jason has a little bit more idea of how this compares to research or not.
I think my experience with salary conversations has mostly been on kind of the product designer, UX generalist kind of approach. So this aligns with what I've seen in organizations. I think the most important thing to note is that these tools for coming up with baselines for your role based on the amount of experience you have and where you're located geographically, they exist and are out there, and you should, before you start applying, should definitely do research on where your target is at based on the amount of experience you have and what the role is that you're looking for. You can't go into a conversation about salary blind or just ballparking because you might eliminate yourself either lowball or going too high. So knowing kind of that these tools are out there to research what salary expectations, what baselines are. And like we said, they can be all over the place as far as what organizations will pay, or in some areas might pay less than the expectation. But make sure that you've kind of done your research about your role before you get started.
Correct. So I'll share my experience. So 2020, I applied mostly banks like Bank of America, BB&T, and USAA. Those are all the banks. And then investment company like Vanguard. So it's highly finance-oriented companies that I applied for. Or the senior designer roles that I applied for, the salary range that I've seen in between those companies was 100K to 115K. Which falls under the graph that we just shared. It's pretty close to that. I would say a lot of times the HR people in the end will come around and say, offer the lower base salary and then say, we offer 2 different bonuses. And then if you enclose those and it pops up to this much and it's actually better, and say things like that. But bonus is bonus. It's not the base salary. Bonus means you may not get it, depends on the company's performance that year, and also your performance matters. And so I wouldn't really consider bonus as part of that negotiation or the salary, but others may be different.
Yeah, so as Min-sun said, it's really important regardless of your level to know the average salary for your role, your level of experience, and your location. That's why we put those screenshots up there, because it's important to know your worth. A good recruiter is going to tell you the salary range that they are looking for in the HR screen so that you don't have to go through the whole process wondering. And so you don't have to lowball yourself, or you don't have to worry about accidentally pricing yourself out of a position. That is a very real fear for a lot of people. If you don't know what a role in a company is willing to pay, that if you say, I want XYZ, and they're only willing to pay, $10,000 a year less than XYZ, have you just taken yourself out of the running? So just knowing your worth, knowing what your experience is worth in your specific location and the industries that you're looking to be in can really help you have productive conversations with recruiters around salary. And those are typically, when you actually start talking about salary, it may be a little bit later in the conversation when you start negotiating, but they should hopefully tell you the range up front.
Yeah, and as Liz was asking in the chat about what point the salary conversations occur, there's always some bit of conversation about what your salary expectations are with the talent person in that first round interview. So you do have to be prepared to talk about it in that first round interview. That's going to be a ballpark, and it's important to keep in mind that the base salary for a role, if we're talking about full-time roles, and I know Another thing that came up in the chat is about contract roles and hourly rates for contract positions. Totally different ballpark in terms of what they're willing to pay, especially when you're talking about being a 1099 employee versus a full-time employee. A lot of the pay comes in the form of your benefits. What does the health insurance plan look like? Do they do a 401k match? That's a huge part of your overall compensation. I know Min-san was saying like don't look at bonuses as part of target, but knowing that the company does a 401k match, that's free money that if you are willing to put towards your 401k that you get. So keep in mind that your base salary is only part of your total compensation. There's also things like restricted stock unit grants that come and other bonus structures that are kind of outside of the base salary structure that could be part of the conversation. But really in that first round with the talent interview, you're only going to be giving kind of a ballpark range to know whether or not you might be eliminated and based on salary expectations. And a lot of times, especially for locations with very high cost of livings like San Francisco or New York, or even Stephanie, where you're at in Seattle, the expectations for employees applying to roles, especially now that we're all remote, are different based on those cost of living expenses. And sometimes companies will or will not adjust based on location. So it is important to kind of know for that first conversation where you want to be.
Yep. This is how to stay, not go crazy with this process. Yep. So for me, I'm just being very honest with you guys, hoping that this experience can help somebody. As I said, I didn't come from a UX, completely UX background to get into the industry. So in the beginning, like a couple of years ago, I had to apply 99 jobs. I kid you not, 99 jobs. And I got only 6 interview offers and 1 turned out to be right. It's very frustrating. My self-esteem hit the bottom, rock bottom. It's very hard. But you just keep trying and push hard and hard, and it eventually worked out. And now as I look for a job as a senior designer, I didn't have to go like 99 jobs. Luckily, I had to only apply 30, and it turned out to be great. I would say one thing I did is that I would ask people that I trust and I work with, ask them, tell me the one really best strength that I have, they think that is for me. Then they will tell me really positive feedbacks about me, how great I am as a UX designer, which encourages me to keep push through this hard time. And so eventually it worked out, and I really appreciate all these awesome feedback from all the coworkers that I once worked together. And you will probably can find different ways to encourage yourself for this time. And I highly encourage you to continue to do everything it takes to stay positive to go through this.
Yeah, like Min-san said, interviewing for any job is a stressful experience. And I think I saw someone in the chat say that, looking through the interview schedule that Jason had was emotionally exhausting, just looking at it. Interviewing for UX roles is grueling, and it is time consuming, and it is hard, and it is emotional. Don't get down on yourself. We have all been there. We have all had rejections. It does not get easier with time. You just kind of learn to accept it, and you learn to understand that it's not about you. You really have to find the right fit. You're not just being interviewed by the company. You're interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you. It's got to be the right fit for both of you, because otherwise you're going to end up leaving in a month and you're going to be really unhappy. I've had that experience. I had the job before I moved to Orlando was not what I was expecting, and I was really unhappy with it, and it's because it wasn't the right fit for me. And so don't be afraid to take your time. and use every interview experience that you have, whether it is successful or not, as an opportunity to get better and an opportunity to learn. And just remember that it has nothing to do with who you are as a person or your value as a designer. It just means it wasn't the right fit, or maybe it wasn't the right opportunity at the time.
And that idea that the organization is not just interviewing you, but you're interviewing the organization when you have the opportunity to talk to a company. And you should be looking for whether or not, whether or not you think that the role fits what you expect, but are the people that you're talking to in the interview process people that you want to work with? Does it sound like the culture is something that you'd be interested in being a part of, that you could add something to and enjoy? It's very much your opportunity to determine whether or not this is the right role for you. And you have to remember that it's, going back to that image with the parable of the blind man and the elephant, from the hiring side, finding the right candidate from a huge haystack is hard. And when, for a given role in a given month, you might get 450 applications, expecting the people to not miss the perfect person and move them on to the hiring manager screen is unrealistic. So always know that there's value, you have value that you can bring to a role, and keep pushing for what you think is the right opportunity for you. Hiring managers aren't looking for, not just skills and experience, they're also looking for passion and purpose and unique perspectives. At least good hiring managers should be looking to bring diverse perspectives into their team. But when you get that rejection, when you get a not a fit, very generic answer from an interview process, know that can mean a lot of things. It can mean that in the process, they thought you might be bored in that role. We've had conversations after an interview that man, this person's really passionate about this specific specialty, and they're not going to have that much opportunity to do that in this role. So, keep a positive attitude, and keep in mind that it's as much about you interviewing for whether or not it's a place you want to work as it is about them finding the right person for the role.
Yep, stay positive. Keep trying. You will get it through. It is hard, but you will. You're right. The fact that you're here tonight speaks volumes. Yes, you are here for that. You're very passionate. And yes, thank you for listening to us.
So I know we got a ton of questions, and we probably answered a tiny percentage of them so far. Before the other organizers try to summarize them, does anybody want to pop off the chat and ask a question out loud?
Don't be scared, we don't bite. I see a hand raised.
Oh, were you calling on me?
Yeah,
that's Hunter.
Hunter,
We've got a couple.
Hello. Yep. All right. Well, my basic question is, as I'm studying UX now, so I have no experience in there. Do you have any recommendations for breaking into the field with no prior relevant experience?
I've got
an entire topic for a meetup a few months ago.
Can't believe I missed it.
I've got some ideas. It's tough, but to me, it's something that is definitely achievable. The biggest thing that I would recommend is practice UX in your everyday life. You don't need to have a UX role to practice UX skills. Look at everything around you. Look at the apps that you use every day. If you want to be a UX designer working in product, look at your favorite apps and break them down and figure out what's working, what's not working. Why was it built the way it was? What can you understand about the company's business model based on the way that the app works? What would you change as a user? That's actually a design challenge that you will sometimes see in the interview process. And so if you can really practice being able to look at something, being able to look at a product and being able to really break it down and think like a UX designer, then you can take any problem and you can create a case study out of it, whether you have a freelance case study, whether it's something that you just choose out of thin air something that you're passionate about, and you can still show that you have those critical thinking skills and those problem solving skills, and that you are thinking about the user and you're thinking about the business needs. So that would be my biggest recommendation, is just start practicing those skills in your everyday life and using things that you're already really familiar with.
Thanks, Steph.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, Nate, I know Tammy had his hand up next, and then we'll move on to Ashley.
Yep. Hi, first of all, thank you all for really good information and very practical information on this job process and different aspects of it. I pasted my question in the chat, but I still raised my hand. I just wanted to ask all the panelists, how did you get your current job? And if you have a story behind it, maybe just if we can hear that story, it would be more helpful, I guess.
Yeah. Mineseon, you want to go first?
I'm trying to process it. How it's a really broad question.
I mean, from which medium did you get your job? Like via LinkedIn, or did someone approach you, or how did you approach for your current jobs? Yeah.
I see. So I applied. I didn't go with the recruiters because at least in Charlotte, 90% of the recruiters approach you with contract position. And I'm not really sure about contract positions, 1 year, 2 year positions. I just had a baby, so I wanted to have some security. So I applied to those jobs. I looked into LinkedIn and Glassdoor and started looking, and that's how I ended on.
I'll jump in too. Yeah. When I started at Paylocity, it was about 3 years ago. But the reason why I changed jobs was because I was specifically looking for something remote, believe it or not, before the pandemic. And so in my current role, I liked what I was doing, but I wanted to be remote, and I had thought about going remote. I had been remote different times in my past career. So I was specifically looking for remote UX opportunities, and didn't expect to be excited about a publicly traded like HCM company. Didn't think that was kind of the challenge I was up for. But as I was saying about the interview process, you're looking to see whether or not a job is something that's good for you. Like when you're in the interview process, I was really excited about the people that I was talking to, and how they felt about the work they were doing. And it sounded like an exciting place, and that's how I landed at Paylocity. And in looking for remote opportunities, I was looking at remote.io, remotive.co, any remote job boards. There's a GitHub repository of remote first companies out there. I'm sure that it's probably grown a lot since the pandemic, but there's a growing number of remote opportunities out there, and I've been talking about remote opportunities since I started at Paylocity about 3 years ago now.
Yeah, so my current job, like Mineseon, I applied through LinkedIn. But actually my previous job has a little bit more of an interesting story. I actually found it on Slack from a conference that I had gone to. And this can be something that is really helpful if you go to any industry conferences. A lot of times they do have a Slack channel, especially nowadays. And a lot of times those Slack channels also have job channels within them. And my previous manager posted in this Slack channel for a conference that I had gone to. And I wasn't even planning on looking. It wasn't something that I was actively doing, but I was interested in what he had posted. And so I reached out to him on the Slack channel and just started asking questions. And I think he was impressed by the fact that I took the initiative to reach out. And so I ended up getting an interview that way. And that was kind of how it led me to that role. And for this one, I was specifically, when I was moving on from that company, I was looking for something a little bit bigger. That was definitely a smaller company, and I was working remote. And I was, funny enough, opposite of Jason. I'm actually kind of looking forward to getting back to in person eventually. So now I'm with a company that is based, or at least has an office here in Seattle. And I was looking for a little bit more stability, a little bit more maturity in a design department. I was looking for more opportunity to grow as a leader. So yeah, that's how I ended up where I am.
Cool. Thank you. Nice
And
stories.
before we move on to other questions, and I know we've got a bunch more, I want to try to, because we're getting up to 9 o'clock now, I'm going to shift us through the end, and we will definitely hang out afterwards and continue to answer questions and
Yes.
have some post meetup time as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now and then move on